It is overtime here again at Old Favorite Friday, and we are only a couple of days away from Christmas. We've done some holiday beers so far this year as far as reviews, so this will be probably our last one. Maybe we'll sneak one in at the last week of the year. But this is the Christmas Ale by Bell's. This is a Scotch Ale. Now, this is the sixth beer that has featured on Old Favorite Friday from Bell's Brewery. I am a hometown boy. I'm a Michigander, so I have a little bit of bias, but Bell's is a great brewery. But this is the first brewery we've ever done 6 beers of. And there's at least one more that I just picked up that I haven't had in a long time that you're going to be seeing in a couple more weeks. So we're going to be a 7-timer here very soon. But let's focus on the Christmas Ale. Let's focus on this beautiful, beautiful Scotch Ale. Ralph, we were chatting a little bit. You were saying you hadn't had this beer in quite a while. I know you like the big malty beers. I know we don't feature a lot of Scotch Ales on this.
No.
Mostly because there's not a lot of Scotch Ales out there.
Yeah.
We did, I believe, do Bellhaven, which a couple months ago. The only one I can never think of that we've actually done on Old Favorite Friday. So I'm excited to talk about Scotch Ale. I love the style. I love this brewery. Your turn to weigh in.
Yeah. So I just want to say I love Bell's too. No really family ties to Michigan or anything, but yeah, there's hard to say that they don't do almost everything well. And no, I just really enjoy this because, like you said, there's not a lot of Scotch ales, but also I would say, especially American breweries doing Scotch ales, I would say this is pretty close as traditional as those type of beers that I've had. You get your caramel, you get like a hint of roastiness, but I would almost call it like more of a biscuit malt, where it's a little more than a breadiness, but it's not quite, you're not getting that coffee you would think or anything like that. But it's really drinkable, which is cool, as we always say, being it's 7.5, almost 8%. But yeah, I really like the balance of this because like there are, I'm sure there's some hops I could kind of like be like in the background, but they really try to stay true, in my opinion, to calling it a Scotch Ale. It wasn't like some interpretation of. I felt like they're like, okay, what is BJCP saying? They did a pretty damn good job of that.
Bell's does such a good job, and so many of the classic breweries that have been around for a long time, the real kind of exemplary large craft micro craft breweries, that grew with the craft beer movement in the U.S., like Sierra Nevada, New Belgium. When they do a beer, they do it well, right? Mm-hmm. They do their research. They've got great brewers, and Scotch ales are. For a brewery that does mostly Belgians, that does big malt beers, this is always going to be right up our alley. It's got a beautiful dark color. It's got all that great flavor complexity you're talking about. I'm getting almost like some dried fruit. I'm getting some toffee. But the most important aspect of it is that none of that is informing sweetness. Mm-hmm. And so many American breweries, when they do a Scotch ale, they leave it sweet. And they think, oh, well, it's big and malty, so it needs to be sticky and sweet. Well, that's not, listen, you can do it. I'm not saying it can't be delicious, but if you're doing a traditional Scotch ale, that's not what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. This is 7.5%. We also see some that will creep up in the 8s and 9s because people really want that big attractive flavor. It's what U.S. breweries are kind of known for. No, these guys went and packed, once again, I feel like a broken record sometimes, packed all that flavor into a 7.5 beer with very low residual sugar that I could drink this 6-pack of and not get tired of it. Ralph, the other day, and to bring up one of our beers, I was drinking Devil's Decadence, right? Mm-hmm. That is, we're talking about Imperial Stout versus Scotch Ale, but just to give you an example. It's a beer that we make. It's a beer that Ralph did a great job of making this year. It's got coconut. It's got a lot of extra sweetness. It's got the whole kitchen sink in there. And it is so delicious to have that beer and share it with somebody else.
Yep.
By the end of that can, I don't want to go and drink another Devil's Decadence. And that's not what that's for. Mm-hmm. But it's an important contrast when you're looking at the beers that have some of those nuances. There's some spice flavors without spices. Mm-hmm. There's some toffee without extra candy sugar or anything. It's got all those nuances without having to pack it so jam full that it's just overwhelming everything. And I'm always in love with beers like this.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was going to say. A cool kind of almost trick they pull off with this beer is it is very drinkable, but in terms of, I would say, if you're just weighing the beer as okay, it's a malty ale, it's a Scotch ale, it does, as my friend Matt would say, it drinks bigger than its ABV suggests. And some of the cool things, like almost the nuance, like the dried fruit and even the caramel I was getting before, and some of the stuff you mentioned, this beer to me, even though 7.5 might not be the ABV you usually think, but I could see aging this and watching in a couple of years this turning into something really beautiful, because it has when I have aged beers before, it has hints of that where you wouldn't necessarily want to age a beer that's overwhelmingly complex or in terms of even just adjuncts. Like I wouldn't necessarily want to age those because there's so many moving parts that can go wrong. But with a beer like this, that is just a well put together traditional multi style, like it can taste the hints of like, oh, if this were to sit on, in a cellar for 3 years, this would, I think, open up fantastically. And you would never be able to just convince somebody this is, it's 7.5% Scotch Ale. They would think there's much more going on.
Well, when you're getting the flavors from the malt, from the hops, from the fermentation via the yeast, you have the potential for the evolution of flavor. Whereas when you're using a bunch of adjuncts, like those flavors kind of dissipate over time. And that's the difference. And that's one of the reasons why we're a Belgian-inspired brewery. Because when you taste our quad after 5 years, it tastes very, very different. And we love beers that run in those lines. Really well-made imperial stouts, Scotch ales, brown ales, rich, full-flavored beers. And not that you can't have great flavor in a golden ale, too. Triples are great, right? There's all kinds of other examples of that barley wine. But to have a Scotch ale as your seasonal, as your holiday ale, as your Christmas ale, I love seeing that because it's not something we see very often. And the fact that you can make it, you can tick it up a notch. It's not a 6% beer. It's got a little more ABV. It represents a lot of people like darker beers in the winter. It's different in Florida. It's always warm here. But when you're up in Michigan and you're in the north, people want a darker beer in the wintertime. They feel it's more hearty. So it just really ticks all the boxes. It's unique. And the fact that not a lot of people are doing this style in general, let alone for their Christmas beer, and it's just so expertly made. These are the beers that make me smile because I drink this, and I think I once again, broken record. If you're watching a bunch of these videos in a row, I know some people do that. When I drink this beer, I think about how proud I would be if I was the one that made it. Right? I just think man, I would feel so good about myself if I put this beer together because it's so well made.
And what I wanted to even add to that is because as it says it on the package, it is a Christmas ale, and to me this makes me, I guess, for at least whatever holidays you celebrate, but it makes me feel more homey. Whereas like some of the Christmas ales, especially the U.S. Christmas ales, try to do so much that like almost they want to be so holiday oriented that it kind of misses the mark.
Yeah.
And this reminds me of something like if I was like, even if, some of my family they live in the Northeast. So when I visit them and you're just tired, you've been on a long plane ride or whatever. And like, if I were to have a beer, where it does get cold up there and you're like sitting in trying to stay warm and you have a beer like this is what reminds me of like families and holidays more than some, peppermint or whatever kind of holiday.
Listen, there's a lot of great versions of those beers with peppermint. We do our Christmas ale with spices, and I understand the desire to do more, but less is more in a lot of ways. Keep it simple, stupid.
Yep.
This keeps it simple, gives you all the flavor, and keeps a lot of the extra nonsense out of it. And much respect to Bell's. Congratulations, Bell's Brewery. You were the first 6-time appearance on Old Favorite Friday. I know it's a very, very big deal for Bell's Brewing to get that distinction. But we really appreciate you. Listen, we hope you have a happy holidays, and we'll see you next week for Old Favorite Friday. Please poke around the channel, see some other conversations that we're having about other great beers just like this one. And let us know what you're drinking this holiday season. Let us know what we should be drinking for Old Favorite Friday next week. We always love suggestions. We use them all the time. And we'll, like I said, see you next week. Cheers.
Cheers.